Welcome to the Thin Places Travel Podcast, where we discuss places where the veil between this world and the eternal world is thin. I'm your host, Mindy Burgoyne.
You could ask the question, are creative people drawn to a place like this, or does the place make people more creative? Of course it's inspirational. It has to be inspirational, you know, and if you go into Dingle, you see some of the pictures hanging in the art galleries in there, and these are places you intimately know because you walk by them every day and you see how the artists have captured them. It seems like a no-brainer to me.
Today we'll be talking about the Dingle Peninsula, and we'll be hearing from our guest Kevin O'Shea, who leads Celtic Nature Walking Tours in Dingle. So let's talk about the Dingle Peninsula. This is a little spit of land at the very southernmost point of Ireland on the west side. It's just above the Avera Peninsula, which is where the Ring of Kerry is. So it kind of juts out into the Atlantic Ocean, and it's very scenic. It certainly is a tourist destination. To give you an idea of how long a drive it is, if you were to come into Dublin and rent a car, you're on the east side of the country at that point, and drive straight across to the west, you'd come to Galway, and that would be about a 3-hour drive. But if you wanted to go from Dublin to Dingle, you'd have to cross over and go south. It would be about a 4.5-hour drive. If you wanted to go from Galway to Dingle, that's about 3.5-hour drive. If you were in Cork, another big city in Ireland, it's about a 2.5-hour drive. In fact, when you get to Tralee, which is the major city just before you go on to the Dingle Peninsula, that would be their major town. Tralee is about an hour drive, just a little under an hour to get from Tralee down into the town of Dingle. So when you go onto the peninsula, there's a way to go up north on the northern side towards a place called Castle Gregory or Mount Brandon. And then there's the option of going the southern side of the peninsula, which is the main road, which goes down into Dingle town. What most people do is they go to Dingle for a day. It's hard to get there and go somewhere else. You know, the first time I went into Dingle, that's what we did. It was a big mistake. We went into Dingle just for the day. We drove all the way down, did the Sleigh Head drive. It was raining, and then came back out and drove to Galway and spent the night. So if you could imagine, that was a lot of driving and very little I remember of that. The one thing I can remember of that whole trip to Dingle was standing in the Blasket Center, which is a big interpretive center about the Blasket Islands, standing in their cafeteria and staring out the window at the rain. And I remember it being very scenic and beautiful. You know, rain can be beautiful, but that's all I remember. I don't really remember the drive. I don't remember meeting anybody. And, you know, if you're going to take the time to go to Dingle, do yourself a favor and absorb everything in the landscape. People ask me all the time, you know, I want to go to Ireland, where should I go? And then I ask them, well, what do you want to see? Or what is your vision of a perfect Irish trip? And they'll talk about, you know, they want to see the, 40 shades of green, the green hills with the sheep, and they want to see the crashing wild ocean against the cliffs. They want to see ruins of monastic ruins, or maybe ancient stone alignments, or, you know, they might want to see mountains. They might want to see, you know, the vibrant towns with the pub culture and the friendly people and local shopping. And they might want to, you know, take in some Irish dancing or traditional Irish music. They might want to go off to an island or go into a really beautiful interpretive center or museum. They might want to taste some of the food. You know, Ireland is pretty good on food now, especially seafood in the West. And every one of those things you can get in Dingle. Now, there are a few places in Ireland where you say you can see the mountains and the ocean. Dingle has pristine beaches. You can get that 40 shades of green. You can have a wonderful, vibrant town with lots of culture and art, traditional Irish dancing, as well as the traditional Irish music, the ancient stuff, all of it can be found in the Dingle Peninsula. So doesn't it make sense, if you've got a limited amount of time, to go there and maybe spend a few days or a few nights, 2 or 3 nights, and you will have experienced much of what you wanted to see in Ireland. So if you only have a little bit of time, consider giving your time to Dingle. Now, at the end of the podcast, I'm going to go through 5 or 6 things that you can do in Dingle that are mostly not in the guidebooks. And that'll help you too if you're planning your trip. And Kevin, who is our favorite tour guide in Dingle, is going to give you his impressions of Dingle as well. So let's get on to Kevin and hear what he has to say. I'm here with Kevin O'Shea from Celtic Nature Walking Tours. Kevin and his wife, Claire, provide walking tours of the Dingle Peninsula. He loves to bring people out into the landscape, wants to have them slow down, feel the energy that's around the Dingle Peninsula, which is really a remarkable place. We use Kevin for our tours when we go to Dingle. So I'm personally a big fan. Welcome, Kevin. Glad you're here.
Hi, Mindy. How are you this morning?
I'm very good, especially because it's 5:30 in the morning. I'm always good at 5:30 in the morning. That 5-hour time difference.
Sharp, I must say.
Yeah, at 4:30, I was thinking, what am I going to ask Kevin today? Anyway, Kevin, can you talk a little bit? You live right down there, sort of in the center, not in the town center, but just not too far from the town center with your family. What's it like to even live on Dingle?
Dingle Peninsula is a beautiful place to live. It really is. You know, I mean, naturally speaking, you know, it's beautiful. You're surrounded by ocean, lots of open space, and yet there's a vibrant community here as well. There's always something going on in Dingle. If you want to look towards the town or look towards the kind of the social scene or whatever, great place to bring up kids. You know, I often kind of say, you know, if you're living in the city, you know, parents have this worry about, oh God, what school will we send our kids to or whatever. There's one school here for all the kids of the peninsula, so everybody goes to the same school, and it's just it kind of creates that social fabric or whatever. The Dingle Peninsula is kind of special as well in that it's what's known as a Gaeltacht area. So it's an area where the Irish language is still officially the first spoken language and still is the first spoken language, and kids receive their education through Irish, and Irish is still used in a lot of homes and a lot of businesses. And I suppose when you come to a place where the old language is still alive, it also means that a lot of the music and the culture is still very strong there. So yeah, it's pleasure to live here. Anyway, it's absolutely no bother to live here at all. And it's kind of one of those places where regularly, you know, when we're talking amongst friends, there's that affirmation of aren't we very lucky to live here? So yeah, we're very happy here. Yeah.
Yeah, I always wondered. In fact, sometimes our guests ask us this on tour. They look around at this awesome landscape wherever they are, and they say, "I wonder if people here get used to this, or it becomes ordinary. This awesome landscape." Where we take for granted our landscape, do they take their landscape for granted? So it's interesting to hear you say, no, in fact, you don't. Even lifelong inhabitants of Dingle, and I've heard it myself, will say, no, it's definitely the stunning landscape never gets old. Tell us what you do when you on your Celtic walking tours. What's the goal of going on a tour with Kevin O'Shea?
Okay, so I mean, I suppose Dingle is known all over the world as a destination, and people love to come to Dingle. And I suppose one of the main attractions of coming to the Dingle Peninsula, one of them, you know, there are many, or probably the most important one is the landscape itself. And you know, so people come here from all over the world, and you know, they're on limited time frames, and they've come here from a long way away. And I just think, to really experience the Dingle Peninsula, you want to get out into those special places. You know, you really want to get out to the beach where the waves are crashing against the rocks, looking out there at Dunquin, out to the Blasket Islands, or hiking up through Mount Brandon, up the Saints Way, or across the top from Masterton Pond. These are just wonderfully beautiful, beautiful places. And so I firmly believe that to really experience the Dingle Peninsula, you need to spend time outside. You know, you need to bring your walking boots, really. You need to bring your raincoat. And you need to, whether you're going hiking or whether you're just slowing down to just spend time at a particular site or on a particular beach. And there are just so many of these places. So what we try to do is anybody who contacts us will try and facilitate them with an outdoor experience, with a hike that suits them. You know, so whether that's to hike up to the highest point up Bar on Thruss, up to the top of Mount Brandon, or whether that's to take a beach stroll. And when we're out there, then we like to take that opportunity to share, you know, some of the stories of the Dingle Peninsula, of Corcagwina. Because, you know, apart from being a very, very beautiful place, it's also a place very, very rich in culture. And so we've had all throughout the landscape, we have between the archaeology of the pre-Christian people who lived here, of the early Christians, right up through the Norman period, right up to the current day. There's the testament to the lives of the people who have lived here, and the story is told in the landscape. So that's the type of thing that we want to explore. But I suppose the principal aim of it is really to get people out to the special places,
right,
and see what happens after that.
So let's talk about some of the places. Like, what are some of your favorite places to take people in Dingle? Well, let's do it this way. Let's ask this question because there's so many. I mean, how do you pick a favorite? But let's say you had a group that could hike and really walk. They were people that could climb. So you had people with very sound physical capabilities, and you were to craft a tour for them. Where might you take them?
Okay. I think this is a great thing. When you're out on the peninsula, you can see special places all over the place, and you've got great lines of vision. And to walk a place really gives you a perspective of where you are. But I mean, if I was with some people who really wanted to stretch their limbs and kind of react to the landscape in that physical way, and to spend time outside and to see the elements as they change throughout the day and the sun travels across the sky, I definitely consider a hike up Mount Brandon. And there's a number of different approaches that you can go at the mountain from, but it's going to guarantee you that you are going to, at minimum, you're going to get to the top of the peninsula. And also you're going to spend 6 hours out in the fresh air. And so I think I'd go for something like that. But there's lots of other possibilities as well. I think the main thing, though, is that regardless of what level of fitness you're at or whatever, there is opportunity for you to tap into that energy that's there. If you want to climb the highest mountain, you can do that. But equally, if you want to go on something that's not going to challenge you too much physically, at least give it the time, So if you, for example, if you go out at 10 o'clock in the morning and you're out until 3 o'clock in the afternoon, you get a different perspective on where you are. Have you ever been in a beautiful place and you've come to it and you've looked at it and it's stunning and it stirs something inside you, but you're in a hurry and you have to kind of get back on that bus or you have to go to the next place? And sometimes in those situations, I think you get left with this kind of sense of loss or something like, that it's there, but I just went from it. So the best thing I'd say to people is, try and build in that opportunity to spend time outdoors.
Let's say we were going to Mount Brandon, because I have a big interest in Mount Brandon. There's several mountains in Ireland that are, considered destinations or to have spiritual links. What is the deal with Mount Brandon? What are the stories related to Mount Brandon?
Okay. So I suppose, first of all, the physical position of Mount Brandon, if you consider it, like the Dingle Peninsula is 40 miles long and it has a backbone of mountain going right through it. So there's a lot of mountain, but Mount Brandon stands right at the end of the peninsula, the northern end of the peninsula. It's this 3,000-foot mountain that's pretty much surrounded by ocean. And, there's amazing, fantastic, beautiful views out of it. But it has been dominating the landscape since man was ever here. And so obviously from, I suppose, the spiritual point of view, it has loomed very, very large in consciousness of people. So there's a lot of traditions associated with it. So its name, Mount Brandon, takes its name obviously from St. Brendan. And of course, St. Brendan, Nave Brian Brown is famous for his voyage, the Brendan voyage, Il Navigatio Sancti Browndani, where he left from the Dingle Peninsula supposedly in the 6th or 7th century, and had this mythical voyage that brought him eventually to the North American coast up to Newfoundland. And it is said it's from the Dingle Peninsula here where he left, and it's said it's from the top of Mount Brandon that he spent time in vigil before, where he heard the voice of the angel, and this quest was shown to him. So it's very much associated with St. Brendan, and that the St. Brendan story is a fascinating story in itself. There's wonderful detail in it. But so it has been considered, I suppose, a holy mountain right throughout Christian time. And it's also the final destination of the Pilgrim's Path, which passes through the peninsula and links up a lot of the sites along the peninsula, like Gollar's Oratory and Kilmulcader. And so when you're on that Pilgrim's Path, your final destination is the top of the mountain. So it has this tradition of having pilgrims, thousands of pilgrims, literally walking it for thousands of years. And I suppose when you climb the mountain yourself, then you are tapping into that type of energy as well. But of course, when you consider the Dingle Peninsula, we know for a fact that there's people been living here for 6,000-7,000 years at least. And so for the vast majority of that time, we were a pre-Christian society. And so if you look back into the pre-Christian tradition, there is tradition surrounding Mount Brandon as well. And it's associated with a Lunasa festival towards the end of August. And still in the folk tradition, you've got the tradition of a Dawn of Crown Dove. And Crown Dove is thought to have been some kind of a pre-Christian god who was associated with Mount Brandon. And then in the folk tradition, then you have these stories about St. Brendan actually converting Crown Dove to Christianity, and this is why the day is celebrated. So I suppose it's one of the things of the Dingle Peninsula that you have all these different perspectives or layers of faith going down through the generations, down through the millennia. And there's still evidence there, either in the archaeology or in the mythology of all these things. So when you're climbing Mount Brandon, you're conscious of all those type of things as well, while you're trying to get yourself up the mountain, which, is no mean physical feat either. You're out there and you're walking and you're breathing the air and you're breathing heavy and all that. So it's a wonderful experience. And a day spent hiking Mount Brandon is the day you will always remember. There is that sense of achievement from it as well.
Okay, well, that's something we're anxious to do. Tell me about some of your favorite sites. What do you love talking about when you're on tour with people? I know I'm a tour guide, and when I get to certain sites, I'm always excited. I love to tell the stories. What are some of your favorite sites to talk about in Dingle?
I see Dingle as it's the whole landscape put together, really, So I suppose when you're on a walking tour, you're looking at the landscape as much as an individual site. But on a lot of our walks, what we're doing is we're seeing the natural landscape where those sites sit, and we're walking between them. And so I suppose that puts me, and a lot of these sites are very ancient, so that this kind of puts me into the mindset of we are traveling in the same way as the people who actually created these sites. We're walking. They were walking. It's that. And so we're almost in those footsteps. And because the Dingle Peninsula, again, as I mentioned earlier, is that Gaeltacht, it still has that link back through the Irish language. So where the conversation a lot of the time goes is, what's held within a language? Why did the Irish language survive in this particular place and it didn't survive in other places? And that kind of brings you to the thing that Dingle's physical position, it's really on the edge. That's one of the things about Dingle. It is an edge, and it has always been an edge. So I suppose we kind of get a little bit into that, there's a whole range of stories from different time periods, but, this idea of this extra energy that's there, or this idea of, for example, the Dingle Peninsula, to the south of the Dingle Peninsula is Dingle Bay. To the south of that is the Iveragh Peninsula. And right out there at the end of the Iveragh Peninsula, in full view, we see this all the time when we're walking, are the Skelligs. So obviously you're looking out at the horizon, you're looking at the Skelligs, and then you're trying to think, what was it the monks were trying to achieve out there? Why did they go to an island, 16 miles off the coast, a rock jutting out of the ocean, and eke out this, with the absolute minimum of absolute zero physical comfort? What were they looking for, So what drew them to that place? And so there is this kind of magic of the place. And when you kind of go in through the portal maybe of the language, which brings you back to the myths, it makes for great conversation. And so these are some of the things that we kind of explore. But when you're walking out along Dunquin, for example, and you're walking between the pier and Dunquin and out there to the headland at Countraha, and out the headland in Countraha is one of the most beautiful places. You know those kind of 360-degree views You just stand on top of a headland and you just rotate 360-degree views. And, you'll go from looking back at Mount Eagle to looking at the Blasket Islands to looking out at the Atlantic Ocean to looking over at Count Shabale, back around to 304, the Three Sisters, and right up there behind you got Mount Brandon. You just can't help by being moved by that anyway. But then when you kind of add to it all the stories and you consider the Skelligs, out in the Skelligs, the monks spent 6 or 7 centuries looking out at what we're looking at now, or that the Islanders, the Blasket Islanders, we have from their literature all their stories and their experiences from standing in that place. And we know then from the mythology that outside of the Blasket Islands, kind of outside Dingle Bay, it's the Blessed Isle, or it's that mythological isle, Tír na nÓg. And so that brings you into the whole world of that kind of Gaelic medieval literature, the old stories of Fionn Machuil and Fina and all of that. So that's what we do. And it's and the thing about the landscape and the stories and the language, they all emanate, I suppose, of the language and the stories came from that landscape. So the stories and the landscape are one, if you know what I mean.
I see.
And there's no real better place, I think, to explore it than in the landscape.
So if someone were to just chat with you somewhere unrelated to your business and say, I'm coming to Dingle, what would you tell them not to miss? I mean, I know you'd want them to get outside, but if you had to pick a site or two.
I can't mention go walking again, can I?
No, we've got that. That's walking is, that's what our tours are all about, or walking.
No, what I mean is, I suppose to start from the top, and not repeating myself, I suppose, be aware that you're in this beautiful place and be aware that you're in this place of language. And I suppose the next thing that's kind of connected to that is the music, because the music comes from that language and the music comes from that landscape as well. And the Dingle Peninsula is very, very rich in traditional Irish music, be that tunes, jigs, reels, polkas in particular, I suppose, or whether that be the songs. And a lot of people would say that the real history of a country is written in the songs. So I suppose that would be the other element I'd be saying to make sure you tap into when you come to the Dingle Peninsula is get out there and experience some music and listen to some music. And if you're a musician, bring your instruments and try and join in as well.
That's great. Where's your perfect place in Dingle? You just aren't going to give me a specific site.
My children, I infuriate my children. My sons always ask me, Dad, what's your favorite film or your favorite song? And I just, I find that.
Okay, let's make it easier.
But I suppose one more element about here is that it yourself, Mindy, you've been here. You can have 4 seasons in any one day,
right?
So you really are at this place where ocean and land and sky meet. And I suppose one of my favorite things about the Dingle Peninsula is that whole element of the sky when you're out as well. So what's great fun actually doing the tour is kind of seeing a different condition of a day, where the wind has come from, what way the weather is supposed to be, etc., and then trying to go somewhere to maximize on that, as it were. But different places at different times. I mean, you have there's a kind of a great awareness, I suppose, around here of tradition and of the history and all of that. So, for example, on the solstice day, there's a stone alignment on the Dingle Peninsula. And so to head out there on that particular day is a wonderful thing, because you're in mind of the people who put that stone alignment there in the first place, and thousands of years ago, and the knowledge they had and the patience that they had and all of that. But it also becomes a gathering place, because other people, your neighbours, will head out there as well. And so that type of thing is I like that element.
What's the name of that stone alignment? That's
the Ardmore stone alignment. It's east of Dingle. So as far as we know, it's a Bronze Age stone alignment. Obviously, throughout the rest of the peninsula, you've got something like 80 or 90 standing stones spread all over the peninsula. You've got some really intriguing sites. I suppose you just asked me about a favourite site there, and I've thought of one now. Is we have going east of Dingle. There's a mountain called Carracunree, and about 2,000 foot up there on the side of the cliff, there's a promontory fort. and it's called Cahar Conry. And Cahar Conry literally means the Cahar of Conry, and Conry was a kind of a demigod type of a figure. Sometimes he's portrayed as a warrior, sometimes he's portrayed as a king. He also has this kind of wizardry story surrounding him. So you have this beautiful, beautiful walk up a mountain. It brings you up to about 2,000 foot. And you can go behind the fort and go a little higher. You've got fantastic views back across Dingle Bay, looking right over to the McGillicuddy Reeks, and looking then further west along the peninsula, back around right through to out Dingle Bay and back as far as Mount Brandon. But you have this fort 2,000 feet up on the top of the mountain. And it was no mean feat to build this fort, but this isn't a prehistoric fort, And you ask yourself this question, why is this fort up here at 2,000 feet? It's not practical. It's not a place where people are going to live. And yet there's all this work, and you can't but help looking at the wonderfulness of the site. And then, so while you have all that going on, then you tap into the stories a little bit. And there's stories, for example, that Cúree was able to create a magical mist around the top of Cahar Conry, and that he was able to actually make the fort spin. And that was its great defense. And then when you're walking up and you see the mist swirling across the top of the fort, and you know the story, it's almost like this invitation to the imagination, and it's playful in many ways, but it just creates that space that allows your imagination to run a little bit, and then you're tapping into the energy then after that, I think.
Yeah, I haven't even heard of that. That's we'll have to do that. 2,000.
I'll show you with Mindy.
2,000 feet isn't so bad. Yeah, you could show me. It would take you a long time.
We'll pick a nice day for that one.
That's what we will. One last thing I always ask people in Dingle that I want to ask you as well, and you've kind of already hinted about it, and that is, does this... Obviously, you must believe, from what I'm hearing you say, that the landscape impacts the imagination, certainly. So, and it comes through with the music. Do you think that being in a place like the Dingle Peninsula affects people's capability to produce art or their creativity?
That's easy answered, I just have to look around where I live and I see who lives around me. And there's a high percentage of people involved in some form of expression, be it music or be it poetry, be it writing, be it the visual arts. I mean, the amount of artists around, and then you have your craft workers, and then beyond that you have the amount of people involved in artisan food. So that's just now looking around, but if you look back through history, it's there as well. It has drawn people towards it for a long time. So without a doubt, but whether that's you could ask the question, are creative people drawn to a place like this, or does the place make people more creative? Of course it's inspirational. It has to be inspirational, and if you go into Dingle and you see some of the pictures hanging in the art galleries in there, and these are places you intimately know because you walking by them every day and you see how the artists have captured them. It seems like a no-brainer to me, absolutely. But I mean, I think a lot of that is, there's this timelessness about the place, which, so you're walking a place and you're walking past a deserted farmyard from previous times, or deserted old farmhouse from previous times. But then you see the rock that it's built on, and it's bringing you into kind of this almost geological time. And so I think that creates a space then that allows you to think these things, and allows you to pursue your muse. And yeah, I have no doubt. Yeah. And, I could name, just thinking of the amount of people who are around who are doing various different things. It's a very, very natural place to follow your art, if you like. Right.
Yeah, it certainly is. Well, is there anything else you want to say before we sign off?
Thanks, Mindy, for the opportunity of speaking my mind. I feel now I can go on and conquer the rest of the day.
Well, where can people find you? On the web, your website is... Oh, yeah,
we're at CelticNature.com. That's our website, and if you go on there, you'll see a few of the different walks we do. We're on Facebook, please, if anybody is coming to Dingle, make contact with us. Tell us a little bit about yourself, and we will plan a good day out for you.
Yeah,
And
I can vouch for that.
it's a job I love to do as well. I mean, the Dingle Peninsula is a wonderful place to live. And one of the things that makes it a wonderful experience is this element of people coming here from different parts of the world and taking the time to visit us and to share in that culture. And it's a lovely exchange. So, yeah, we love it. And we look forward to meeting you again, Mindy, and your fellow friends.
Yes, we will be seeing you in May on our Places of Resurrection tour. So I'm excited about that. Well, thank you, Kevin, and have a great rest of the day. We hope to talk to you again soon.
Thank you very much, Mindy.
Okay.
Bye for now.
All right.
It's on and on.
While Dingle is a great destination for tourists, it also is a place that has a unique spiritual vibration. So Ireland tends to have a lot of places where you stand and you almost feel connected to the divine or the divine presence just by being in a particular place. But Dingle seems to resonate with this sort of spiritual energy all over the peninsula and not just in one particular place. Dingle itself has a spiritual energy, a vibe, if you will, or a capability in the landscape for tuning in to your own spiritual side. It just seems to be more readily recalled in Dingle. And people have written books about this. There's been many books written about Dingle. One of my favorite authors to write about Dingle is a man named Chet Ramo. Chet was a professor of physics and astronomy at Stonehill College in Massachusetts, but he's also a brilliant writer and poet. He had a summer home on Dingle, and I guess he spent the summers writing. He wrote a book called Climbing Brandon, all about the Mount Brandon experience. But one of my favorite books that he wrote is a little book of reflections called Honey from Stone, A Naturalist's Search for God. And Chet does go into, he says he's an agnostic, or he sort of rejected religious principles the more educated he got. In fact, I'll read just a snippet from the introduction in this book, where he says, I was raised in a traditional religion that made much of indelible signs, but early on I abandoned the theology and religious practices of my youth. I took academic degrees in science, and I found in science a compelling vision of reality. I don't mean to say that I turned science into religion. Science is too shallow a vessel to hold ultimate mysteries. And then he goes on to say about Dingle, perhaps it was something of the physical and spiritual geography of the Dingle Peninsula that caused me to reinitiate the religious quest. I have tramped the landscapes of the Dingle Peninsula, studying the rocks, the sky, the flora, and the fauna, and I took whatever scraps of revelation I could find. I sought the burning bush, and I did not find it, but I found the honeysuckle and the fuchsia, and I found the gorse and the heather. When I called out for the absolute, I was answered by the wind. If it was God's voice in the wind, then I heard it. We will put information about Chet's books in our show notes so that if you want to get copies, you can easily find them. Dingle, as I mentioned, has this spiritual vibe, and certainly Chet's writings echo that. I'd like to share with you an experience I had in Dingle. It was many years ago. In February, I was traveling alone, and I wanted to see the north side of the peninsula because I hadn't gone up there. And I was, at the time, writing a piece on thin places, and I had a deadline to meet, and I was suffering terribly from writer's block, which is really a lack of confidence about your capability to write on a certain subject, and I was definitely not feeling confident. And I had with me many other writings by authors well known who wrote about thin places, and I was hoping to read them kind of on the way and get inspired. So I came onto the northern side towards Castle Gregory, and I went to visit a little tiny place called Kilshannig. So it's up there past Castle Gregory. Kilshannig is named for St. Shannon, who had a little settlement there. And there's a remnant of, I believe, a 12th century church there that was built on the site of St. Shannon's original monastic settlement. And there is inside this church a beautiful stone slab, a pillar stone. And on the pillar stone, there's a carving of a cross. So they believe it's left over from the monastic community, but there is certainly a sense of power and connection when you're standing in that little chapel there at the edge of Brandon Bay, out in the very, very wild part of the Atlantic, looking at Mount Brandon, because on the northern side, Mount Brandon just dominates the landscape. So you have the Holy Mountain, you have the monastic ruin, you have all this stuff. And it was a very special spiritual moment for me. And I remember the prayer in my heart was, why can't I write this thing? Why can't I get my confidence back? Why can't I be as good as these other people who have written about thin places? And I remember sort of uttering that prayer out loud and getting nothing, like absolute silence. No connection with the divine whatsoever, unless the divine was purposefully turning away from me. And it was doubly disheartening. And of course, then it started to rain. So to get out of the weather, I got in my car and I continued on the road towards Mount Brandon, which is where the road kind of ends on the north side. So I got to a little place where there were many turnoffs on that road to go out to the beach, which the beaches are beautiful there on Brandon Bay. I pulled off onto one strand, parked in the parking lot, and as I was about to get out, the sky just opened up and the rain was lashing down. So I thought I'll sit in the car and I'll read some of the stuff these people have written about thin places. So I remember picking up one particular entry and read through it. And I thought, this is trite and sappy and skimming the surface and sentimental, using, sort of, overdone phrases. And this author had books on the New York Times bestseller list. This was a very well-known author. And when I read the commentary on Thin Places written by this author, I was not impressed. And I remember thinking, I could do this so much better. Couldn't I? But actually, I couldn't write anything. So as the rain let up, I walked down onto the beach, probably as disheartened as I have ever been as a writer, and walked out onto that strand. The beach is there on Brandon Bay and around Dingle. It's very, very hard sand. You could probably drive a truck on them and not sink in. And because the sand is so hard and the shoreline is so deep, it reflects everything around it. It reflects the landscape. So you'll see the water and you'll see the sky and the mountains, and then you'll see the reflection in the sand of the same landscape. So it's just breathtaking, even in the rain. So the sky was very gray, and I walked out into the bay and let the water kind of wash over my feet. And in February, this was very cold. But just as I was standing there, I looked up to Mount Brandon and I said this kind of prayer. If this author, who is so well known, can write about thin places so awfully, so terribly, why in the world can't I write about thin places? Why can't I? What is wrong with me? And as I said that, I looked down in the sand. A wave had just sort of washed out. And in the sand was the image of a man. A full man, probably 5 feet, long in the sand. I could see a face. I could see the arms. I could see the head. It almost looked like there was a little hat. And I was so overwhelmed with the reality of this happening, I began to just take pictures because I didn't want to ever lose the image. And I took picture after picture. And the water didn't come back up and wash it away while I was standing there. And in fact, when I was done taking pictures, it was still there. And it almost looked like the man had his right hand extended with something in it, like he was giving something. Now, does that mean something? I don't know. I'm not as prone to interpreting signs or deciding what they mean, but I know that it was strange and that it appeared right when I was done saying, why can't I write anything? So after sitting with the man in the sand for a while, I decided to head on back to my car and then travel on around to where the road ends at Mount Brandon. And I picked my stuff up and began to head back to the car. I noticed off to my left, when I looked up at the sky, it was incredibly black. There was a big storm coming. And right in that blackest part of the sky was the most brilliant rainbow I have ever seen. It was not a full rainbow. It was just a sliver like a ribbon, but it almost looked as if someone had colored it in with fluorescent markers. So there's another little sign That was a very powerful moment. That was a moment where time stood still and I felt like I was not in this world. It's very personal too, so it's not something that's easy to share. But I share it because it does demonstrate that Dingle is a special place. Things like that have not happened to me a lot. There is a special connection. One of my favorite quotes about this connectivity of place to person that addresses thin places is by Mark Patrick Hederman, who was a Benedictine out at Glenstill Abbey, County Limerick. And he said, on the summit of Mount Sinai, on the road to Santiago, God does not stand any closer or speak any louder, but we listen better. And I think that explains the conundrum of how can God be more present in one place or another, when in fact, it isn't really about God being more present. It's about us being more in tune and in tune with that energy, which makes the case that it's the energy of the place sort of connects with our spirituality and our intuition and capability to communicate on that higher level. The ability is increased in a place like Dingle. So that's the kind of thing that I wanted to impart. Now, I want to wrap up this segment with one more example of a person who stated that the spiritual energy of Dingle had an impact on their life, and that is an artist, a painter in Dingle named Carol Cronin. Her gallery is down on Green Street, and if you ever get a chance to be in Dingle on Green Street, do stop in. I'll have the link in the show notes. I walked into Carol's gallery many years ago, and I saw her work, and I just casually asked her, does being in Dingle make a difference to your artwork? Does where you are have any impact on your ability to paint? And she began to answer in such a powerful way that I asked her to stop and said, would you mind if I recorded this? And she let me do a little video of her response, which we have on YouTube. But we're going to play it for you now so you can hear an artist's version of how Dingle affects creativity. Do you believe that a place or the spiritual energy of a place has anything to do with a person's ability to create?
Yes, I think it has everything to do with it. And I think I have proof. I love travelling. I've been, although I'm from the east coast of Ireland, I left when I was about 20. I lived in London, Glasgow, Paris, and then finally settled in Amsterdam in Holland for 10 years. All the time painting abstract work and loving it, like really enjoying it. But I came here in 2002 for a short visit.
Here in Dingle?
Here's Dingle.
Okay.
And more specifically, I visited the Great Blasket Island with my younger sister. And I can only say that as soon as I stepped onto that island, my entire life changed. I don't know why, I don't know what it was, but I knew I was going to move there. And sure enough, within 3 weeks, I was living there on the Blasket Island. And my work also I just stopped painting abstract work. I knew I had to paint the sea, I knew I had to paint what was around me, but I actually stopped painting completely and started drawing because I was too afraid to start painting immediately. I did a lot of very, very detailed drawings of the sea, of my surroundings, and then 1 year later, I started painting. So I had to develop a new technique. I had to approach it in a very slow and considered way because it was such a powerful, just the surroundings had such a powerful impact on me. And I can't explain what happened, but I'm so glad that I found this place. I've travelled since. I went off down to Cuba for 2 months and then decided that I'd go to Spain for a little while. And you might be able to see there's a painting there of the Alhambra in Granada. I stayed there for 8 months and I just couldn't paint. It is a beautiful, beautiful place, but I had no connection to the land. I had no spiritual connection. I don't know what you want to call it, but no inspiration. And it was the greatest proof to me that it very much matters where you are, what inspires you. And I came back to the misty greys and silvers and the clouds of Ireland, and I've never been happier.
And how do you like living in Dingle? Do you live here?
I love it. I spend 6 months of the year here, at least this gallery, and I live here. It's like camping.
Oh, you live in the gallery?
I live in the gallery and I have my studio upstairs. But then for the other 6 months, I live by the beach, by the sea, and I do a lot of my work in the wintertime, painting and sitting in the car doing drawings with the windscreen wipers going like crazy and the storms and everything. And it's a lovely balance because I continue on painting. I'm painting as I'm here, but it's a great balance to be here talking to the people that come in, and you get to know the people who buy your work and where your work goes to. And that's really why I set up on my own and I took my work back from the galleries in order to be able to. Well, I care about them. I care where they go to. And
You care where the paintings go.
yeah, definitely.
So, how long did you live on the Great? You lived on the Great Blasket Island, the one that was populated now.
That's right. No, it wasn't really populated. You couldn't really say that unless you count 3 as a population. I mean, I moved there in June. I took a rucksack with me from Amsterdam, and I thought I'll come back and I'll get my stuff later. It took me 4 years to go back and get my stuff. It was like I just didn't want to leave. But I only stayed on the island itself from June until October, and then I moved to Dunquin, which is the tiny weeny little village. It has one pub,
Right.
and some houses, and that's it. But the most fantastic people in the world. So I moved there, and I lived there for 8 years or so. Yeah, and that will always kind of stay my home in Ireland.
So there's a draw of the land.
Yeah,
Thank you, Carol.
you're very welcome.
A visit with Carol Cronin is always such a pleasure. I'm now going to go into our last segment where I will give you 10 things to do in Dingle that are not likely in the guidebooks. And number 1 would be to visit the Carol Cronin Gallery. You certainly will not be disappointed. Carol's gallery is on Green Street, just behind Dick Mack's Pub. She paints the water, the ocean. Every painting is a different version of her interpretation of the water, and they are mesmerizing. Carol is also a delightful person, so if she's there when you stop in, you will so enjoy chatting with her. Ask her what inspires her. She's very, very open and willing to share. The second thing I would recommend is right near Carol's gallery, and that's to visit Courtney's Bakery. So it's a local bakery in Dingle that has artisan breads and cakes and scones and all kinds of baked goods. It smells so wonderful when you walk into it. They also have lunches available if you want to have lunch. Definitely worth stopping in. They're open every day except Sunday. And then there is something you must do, and that's to visit the Harry Clark windows in Dingle. So it is located in the Chapel of the Sacred Heart, which was the old convent of the Presentation Sisters. It's next to the Catholic Church. So if you see the Catholic Church on Green Street, you can see the convent right next to it. So the convent is no longer used. The nuns have moved on, and it's now the Andysert Visitor Center is there. It's kind of a cultural arts center. And if you stop in there, they will take you up to the chapel where you can see the Harry Clark windows. You may have to call ahead because I believe they're staffed by volunteers. But Harry Clark was an illustrator, and he illustrated fairy tale books, Hans Christian Andersen and Edgar Allan Poe. So he had this sort of mystical flair with those illustrations that he brought to his stained glass craft. And he's very well known for the faces of his subjects, the eyes especially. So in this 12 windows, there are 6 pairs. Each pair represents some element of Christ's life. There's scenes like the visit of the Magi and the baptism by St. John. The scripture passage, my favorite window is Suffer the Little Children, and it has all the faces of small children and mothers in it. So it's so worth seeing. If you are in Dingle, don't miss that. The fourth thing I would recommend is going to the traditional music and folk concert. This is done April through October down at St. James Church on Main Street. So this is the old Church of Ireland. It's no longer a church. It's used as an entertainment venue. And I think it's 3 nights a week, April through October. Local musicians come in and do a concert. You can pick up the tickets at the Dingle Music Shop, which is down towards the harbor right next to the Dingle Bay Hotel, or you can buy them at the door. It's better to buy them ahead of time, though, because you can wait a long time in line at the door and then you don't get very good seats. So this is my favorite thing to do because I love the traditional music. And while Dingle is full of pubs, that have traditional music at night, that trad music doesn't start until like 9 or 10 o'clock. And for me, that's just too late. So I'd prefer sitting and being able to just listen to the music and take it in. And the musicians are wonderful. And some of them are musicians that play in the pubs anyway. So that is the traditional music folk concert at St. James Church. The fifth thing I would recommend doing in Dingle is going to the beach. And there are many beaches. There's the Blue Flag Beach that most people know associated with Dingle, and that's Inch Beach. But down in Ventry, there's a more private beach, beautiful beach. The locals go there. There are many beaches, strands up on the north side, as I mentioned when I was talking about my experience near Mount Brandon. So the beaches are gorgeous there. So if you love the beach, make sure you get a chance to sit on one in Dingle. Number 6 would be to somehow engage with Mount Brandon. So Mount Brandon dominates the end of the peninsula, but to be able to put your feet on that mountain, even if it's just the base, and feel the spiritual energy there, the pull of that sacred mountain. That was sacred long before the Christians, they believe. But when St. Brendan launched his voyage from there, his mythological voyage, they say, he was making a statement about that mountain, leaving from that holy mountain. You can get to Mount Brandon at the end of the Pilgrim's Path, which people in town can show you, but I have a post that I will put in the show notes that actually gives you a map of these places. And you can walk a little ways up the mountain. You don't have to do the whole mountain walk, but you can get the feel of just starting up that path. Or you can do the full walk. You can go up the whole 3,000 feet. There is a trail that goes up to the top. And another easy way is to go around the north side. That road that goes to Castle Gregory and then down and around the north side along the beaches kind of ends at a parking area, which is right at the foot of Mount Brandon. So you can get out there and put your feet on the mountain at that point and really stand in the presence of that holy mountain. Number 7 would be in that same area to go out to Kilshannig. So Kilshannig is up past Castle Gregory. I'll have it on the map. And it's that little church ruin that I talked about with the cross slab when I was talking about the man in the sand in a previous segment. This is, as I said, it's a small church ruin with a gorgeous old slab propped up on the inside. And it's likely that this slab was from pre-Christian times. There are many slabs like it up in County Donegal, where St. Columba founded his monasteries. They might have been standing stones or markers. And when the Christians came, they carved the Christian symbols on them, kind of Christianizing them. The little church was the mainland base for St. Shannag's monastery. So if you look out to sea, you'll see these islands that are just off the coast there. And if it's a clear day, you can see the monastic ruins of St. Shannag's monastery that was on one of those islands. And the church that you're standing in was like the mainland base. So it's quite a sacred spot, and it's in such a beautiful setting. It's really high energy place. Number 8, a low energy place, as far as spiritual energy goes, but a very nice place to visit is O'Sullivan's Courthouse Pub. There are lots of good places to eat in Dingle, but this is one of my favorites. It's a newer pub, but it's in that traditional Irish style. They have great trad music. They have really good food. Sometimes you have to book a table, though, because it does get crowded. Tommy O'Sullivan is the owner, and it is just my favorite place to eat, so I thought I'd pass that recommendation on to you. Number 9, walk with a local. If you can get somebody like Kevin, we have Kevin's information in the show notes, get a walking tour going with somebody that can really show you the insider's view of Dingle. That there's nothing that can replace a personal tour by a local. And there are many people that do that, but we think Kevin's the best, but there are others out there. And number 10, finally, take a wander on up Main Street and visit the West Kerry Crafters Guild. So there's a storefront just up from the Dingle pub that has it's kind of like a crafters co-op. Local crafters have all kind of come together and put their stuff in a store with very affordable prices, staffed by volunteers who are artists. So it's a good place to stop and get a memento of Dingle that has some meaning behind it because a local made it. So that is on the map that I'll have in the show notes. So these are my 10 suggestions. Now, what I didn't mention are the things that are really awesome to do in Dingle that are in all the guidebooks. So I just want to stick my neck out and say, you want to make sure you drive around Sleigh Head, take that scenic drive. You want to stop in at the Blasket Center, because a lot of Dingle's, the tourism benefit is learning about the Great Blasket Island and how the people migrated from there to the mainland. Carol talks about the Great Blasket Island, and the Blasket Center really does interpret that culture of the Blaskets, and it's worth visiting. Taking a ride through Connor Pass is another very popular thing to do, and that's certainly something I'd recommend, and that is the mountain road that kind of connects the north end of the peninsula to the village. Don't take it if it's a rainy day because you won't see anything, and it's a windy little mountain road. So it can also be kind of daunting if you don't have any visibility. But if it's a clear day, it's one of the most beautiful drives you'll ever take. Well, and that concludes our recommendations of Dingle and this podcast on Dingle. I want to thank you for listening to the Thin Places Travel Podcast. Now, if you have any questions or thoughts or travel stories or sites you'd like us to feature on the podcast, you can find us on the web at thinplacespodcast.com. And if you enjoyed this episode, please give us a quick rating and review on iTunes under Thin Places Travel Podcast and consider subscribing. Please join us in our next episode where we will feature artists, creativity, and imagination and how they are affected by thin places. And our guest will be Joni Madden from Cherish the Ladies. Thank you for listening, and please be sure to check out our tours to mystical sites at thinplacestour.com. The music for this podcast is Native Spirit, performed by Cheryl Ann Fulton from her collection, The Once and Future Harp. Goodbye for now, wishing you love and light and every blessing.